Today we say goodbye to my custom loop in the Ghost S1. I've been using this system for a few months now, and I'll be honest, it's been an absolute blast. I really could not ask for more when it comes to a compact desktop system. When I'm playing games, it's super quiet, thermals are good enough, and when I'm editing, I don't really hear a peep from the system at all. But having said that, every now and then it is nice to have a bit of a change. So today we're taking the custom loop that's in there, that's an 11 litre case, and we're cramming it into an even smaller case. This is the 9.5 litre sidearm T1. Some of you may have seen the review that went live about a week ago, but to sum it up, this is a more compact case than what I've got currently, but thermal performance is actually better. That's mostly due to it being just incredibly well ventilated. I mean, you can see through the entire case right there. And I'm hoping that thermal performance will be slightly better than I've got currently, but at the same time having a more compact desktop system. I'll also mention that since moving to a completely liquid cooled system, even though it is quite compact and thermals aren't as good as they're going to be with a larger radiator system in, say, a mid-tower case, I really don't think I can go back to air cooling specifically for the graphics card. Having a really quiet gaming experience, I've realized, is really important to me because I don't want my system screaming at me when I'm trying to kick back and enjoy a few games with some friends. And some of you are probably wondering about this case right here. So this is the Endcase M1. This is 12.5 liters, so slightly larger than these other two options. And some of you may have heard me say that this is kind of the holy grail of compact PC cases that you can currently buy. You can do so much with this case, it really is incredible. So some of you are probably wondering why I haven't moved my custom loop main system into this case instead. And the simple answer is, I don't really need to. The thermal performance, like I said, in my current smaller case is more than fine. And if I was going to move to this case, it would be a dual radiator custom loop. So one of the radiators on the side and one of the radiators on the bottom. I really don't need that sort of level of cooling performance just yet, but we might in the future. But for now, we will be moving to the sidearm T1. Without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so that is the teardown of the Ghost S1 complete. Pretty straightforward, as you guys saw, no real hiccups or problems that we came across. Now comes the hard part though, which is figuring out how to fit this all into a smaller case. I will give a shout out to AlphaCool for making radiators with the G1 quarter ports on both sides, which, as you guys saw, allows you to fill and drain the system just by opening up one of the other side that you're not using. And that was really a lifesaver when it came to draining the system. But I was really surprised with how little dust there was throughout this whole build. This build has never used any dust filters at all, and using it for about 4 or so months, I've never cleaned it at all. So the only real traces of dust are throughout the radiator and then on the fan blades. The motherboard and GPU are completely fine. Even the case itself really doesn't have much dust on it at all. And lastly, just a mention of the GPU water block, which, since we're just using distilled water mixed with a clear concentrate coolant, there's definitely no reason to take the water block off this GPU and clean it or anything like that, because there's no clogging. And that's why I'm going to leave the motherboard completely assembled as is. I'm not going to take the pump block off there because I just assume that's going to be healthy as well. So in summary, teardown was nice and simple, but now really comes the hard part. And here it is, my new daily driver in the Sidearm T1, and I've got to say this is easily one of the cleanest systems that I have ever built. Somehow the tubing runs just worked out and they weren't as much of a problem as I thought they would be initially, and I think it's actually one of the best parts of the build. There is still a bit of air in the loop that I do need to get out, and that just requires a bit more time and patience. But as epic as this build is, not all things went to plan. If you guys saw the build video of my liquid-cooled Ghost S1, the previous build that I had, you'll remember that the GPU fittings were just slightly too big to get that side panel on. We did eventually overcome this with lower profile barb fittings, but these in the Sidearm T1 are just still a little bit too tall. So that's one thing with the build currently. The side panel on the GPU side won't close, but I do have some low profile terminal fittings on the way which should hopefully fix this. Now let's talk about that 240mm radiator at the top there, and I knew this would be tricky. It is a really small build after all, but the 240mm radiator brackets are included, and I was told that it did fit in there with a little bit of, tweaking with what fans you choose. But let me just say, if you do get the chance to build in this case, do not bother with a 240mm radiator. Even just a standard off-the-shelf 240mm AIO, really do not bother. The initial plan was to mount a full-sized fan up front and then a slim fan at the rear, seeing as this is what I had been told was compatible from the creator of the case, but the mounting here just did not line up. The only option here was then to use two slim fans, and I decided to mount these between the panel and the radiator. So the 240mm radiator is mounted to the bracket underneath the motherboard, pretty secure, but the fans aren't actually mounted at all. They're just kind of sandwiched in between the panel and the radiator and stuck in place. The reason for this is that there is literally zero clearance in there for screws. Even with the fans just sitting in there, the panel does have a slight bulge and does need a bit of pressure to get on. If the T1 was just 1mm taller in this compartment, it would have been perfect for this build. In terms of the practical effect that it has on this build, I'm not really too bothered by the slight bulge in the top panel. I mean, you can really barely see it in person, and even on camera, it's really not that apparent. But the reason I'm bringing this up is just for you guys who plan on building in this case eventually when it does get released, just avoid 240mm AIOs altogether. It is not supported well enough for me to recommend that you guys do it. The thermals with a 120 are good enough that I really would push you in that direction instead. Now in terms of thermals, I'm going to wait until I've got the proper GPU fittings until I do some longer thermal testing, as that way we'll actually be able to get the side panel on. But I'll just say for now that thermals look about as good as my Ghost S1 build. As I mentioned in the initial sidearm T1 review, you will see better thermal and noise performance by having the case flipped and radiator and fans up top. So this is how I intend to run the case for personal use. Now despite these couple of hiccups, I've got to say that I am super happy with how this build turned out, and I really can't wait to clock in some game time and some editing time with this thing, because I mean, under 10 liters and so much performance here, I really can't wait to use this thing properly. So of course we will do a follow-up video when I get the proper terminal fittings for the GPU, and we'll follow up with some proper thermal testing as well. Until then, if you guys are interested in any of the parts, I will have those linked down below. As always, a huge thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.